Good afternoon, everybody. I will talk about basically greenwashing and how you can prevent that and what legislation is in place. Perhaps first, Centexbel, for those who don't know who we are. So I'm the consultant regarding clothing textiles. When European Commission thinks about textiles, they have clothing in mind and they forget a lot of other textiles, like geotextiles and so on. So often those teams come on my desk first and then they go to my colleagues. But what does Centexbel do? We are a membership organization, and actually every textile company in Belgium is an obligated member by law of us. We are a non-profit organization and we are governed by the industry. So we are in service of the industry as well. We work basically for European companies. So we don't only work for Belgian companies. We are with about 180 people. Most of them are highly educated, especially the researchers. And we try to innovate and to make the industry more sustainable with an eye on the future. What do? We try to inspire the industry to connect. If you are in need of partners and we know somebody that can help you, or you're in need of a product and we know that somebody can help you, we bring you in contact with them. We don't do research then. We try to solve issues. When partners have issues and they already did some research, they can't solve it, we try to help them, and we create as basically our R&D department. And then basically on research strategy, we always do research close to the industry. We want that our research goes to market. So it's application oriented. It's driven by the industrial needs, and we aim to sustainable solutions. So we will never develop something that is worse than what is already out there. So research and developing, testing, we have different testing labs, platforms for open innovation. We have semi-industrial equipment like extrusion machines, machines that can make coating, breeding, composites and so on. We do product certification. We are a notified body, can, for instance, certify firefighter suits, and we do on knowledge dissemination, like I'm here today. So where we are based, basically in Ghent, is the head office, where the chemical lab, physical lab, and burning behavior lab is. Also in Grasselonje, it's near Liège-Luik, a microbiological lab, who has a lot of work these days, and the comfort assessment lab, and then plastics and polymer characterization is in Kortrijk. I'm here because of this Interreg project. This gave us the chance to investigate what I'm going to tell you today. So standard versus legislation. I want to introduce you first to that, how both are in balance with each other, how they interact with each other. A standard is a strict documented procedure, a technical document that gives a basis for doing something. It's a consensus-built document, so you have a group of people, experts on the subject, that will have a consensus that this is the best option, the best way. It's a technical document with rules, guidelines, and characteristics and definitions for common and repeated use. So everybody must be able to use this document, and when you use it, the outcome must be the same. And it's free of use, unless somebody obliges you to comply with the document. But in the basis, a standard is free of use. You are free to use this document. It's not a legislation, unless legislation refers to it. For the Netherlands, for instance, there's a standard, or there's legislation on fire safety of normal clothing. They refer to a certain test standard and limits. Legislation that's binding. You need to comply with this legislation, except when it's a recommendation or advice. Sometimes it's limited to only a certain party. But this is really obligated, and that's one of the big differences between a standard and a piece of legislation. Some legislation applicable to textiles. For all products, so for any textile, there's a general product safety and the REACH regulation on chemicals and waste directive. And then, depending on the case, you have personal protection, equipment legislation, toys, and biocide regulation. This is regarding safety. Then you have legislation regarding protection of consumer rights. Unfair commercial practices is often forgotten, and I will go more in depth in the next slides. Fiber composition regulation, you need to declare what fibers are in your product, and regulation on organic products. If you say, I have bio-cotton, this regulation is applicable to you because you claim that it's organic produced. In the future, there will be, due to the policy on sustainability and circularity, there will be some changes. There's general policy and very specifically for textiles policy. And legislation that we know already is the waste directive. The unfair consumer practices will change. And fiber composition regulation also will change. And I go into depth into them further in the presentation. And also new eco-design for sustainable products regulation. Textile will be added to this. So they want to expand what is already now out there for electronics, also for textiles. And also, of course, the corporate sustainability due diligence will be applicable to textiles. Unfair consumer practices. Here is why this is applicable to persons who put it into the market and what is prohibited. Basically, if I make a claim and a consumer chooses my product to buy my service or product over that of my competitor based on that claim must be trustworthy. If it's not trustworthy, I am in violation of this regulation. Basically, it's that. So it's what you claim. It's very important. It needs to be trustworthy, and you need to be able to prove this. Who is responsible? Any trader. The definition of trader is there. And I want to point out that anyone acting in the name or on behalf of the trader is also responsible. So if I'm a buyer and I'm buying for a company, I'm responsible for what I claim. Or if I'm a marketeer, I'm responsible for what I claim. Market surveillance authorities need to check this. In the Netherlands, this is the Nederlandse Voedsel- en Warenautoriteiten. In Belgium, this is the FOD Economie or the Economics Department of Belgium. And what is very specifically prohibited, there's an annex. So the only thing that refers a little bit to green claims is that you can't use a trust mark or a certain label if you're not allowed to use this. So for instance, I claim that my product is Oecotex compliant, but I don't have the certificate to support this. I'm in violation directly by this second point under the annex. And this is here a little bit of the shortcoming of this piece of legislation. It's based on very untrustworthy communications that traders do, but like the green claims are not really present, very visible in this piece of legislation. That's why they are going to amend this. The future European strategy. So what do they want regarding communication? That there is more communication between the different actors within the textile value chain on environmental sustainable characteristics. So substances of concern, how can I repair my piece of textile? What is the fiber composition? This will lead to a product passport. Actually, what they're saying here, we need a product passport, and this needs to be communicated with the persons who want to know this. Then another thing is green, eco-friendly. My product is sustainable. This will not be possible anymore unless you have a type 1 label or you are compliant with a certain piece of regulation. So the EU eco-label, if I have this for my textile product, I can claim that it's sustainable. So this is a very harsh condition, so very heavy requirements. If you want to say I have recycled content, this needs to be verified by a third party. Otherwise, you can't make the claim. So this is where Europe wants to go to. So when they will achieve this by changing regulations that I previously mentioned. What is then the link between a standard that is voluntarily and legislation, some pieces of legislation that I mentioned? There's this harmonized standard, and this is a European Commission, and they did this for plastics. So the European Commission gives a mandate to SEN, and basically the European Commission asks, please can you develop this and this and this standard, because we need it for this legislation. So if a mandate is given, and they did it for plastics on basically on eco-design, on recycled content, on the characteristics of recycled plastics. If you are compliant with this document, so the document that SEN then developed, you are presumed to be conform the legislation. So at least the legislation that is mentioned. And this is mentioned in the Annex ZA. Only EN standards can be harmonized, so no technical documents, TRs, TSs. Also no international standards, no national standards. So an NEN can never be harmonized by the European Commission. There's an exception, this is the EN ISO. When it's under the Vienna Agreement, a document is developed as a European and an ISO standard at the same time. Those can be harmonized. The development is basically the same. The European Commission gives a mandate. You have a normal standardization development within SEN, so you need a consensus within the group. There are votings. And then when it's published, it goes back to the Commission, and they then say, okay, it's good enough to be linked to our legislation. We add the Annex ZA, and it becomes a harmonized standards. There's a list of harmonized standards on the website of the European Commission, but they are mostly there for product safety. The eco-design regulation has already some test standards to measure the consumption of electricity for a certain piece of electronics. So now we come to the main topic, avoiding greenwashing. And this is something a designer showed me once. I have here a polyester tissue, and it's made from coffee grounds. And drink it, wear it is a little bit like, okay, I drank my coffee, what is left of it, I make fabric from it. So I saw the mountains of coffee grounds before me to extract the oil, to have then a square meter of polyester fabric. So that was my first idea. How in the hell's name do they do this? So they have a lot of claims on it. And if you look further, coffee we drink is transformed into. It's a low temperature process and into the yarn surface. So that are some of the claims they make. So what do they do basically? They extract the oil, that part is true, but that goes to the cosmetic industry. They don't use it. They will blend the coffee grounds when the oil is extracted with coconuts, and they burn it at 700 to 1,000 degrees. I looked up the patent to know what they did. So they burn it, and that is then used within a master batch. For those that don't know what a master batch is, this is basically if you have polyester, a master batch for polyester, it's polyester materials with a lot of chemicals inside that is then within the yarn production used to spread out certain chemicals. Like titanium oxide, which is a white pigment, is put in polyester to make it dull, to remove the shininess of polyester. So basically they replaced the titanium oxide, which is 1 to 2%, by the coffee ground and coconut. So is this drink it, wear it? According to me, no. But I'm not a market surveillance officer, but I would give you a fine if I was one, if you claim this. So how can you avoid those things? There's a standard, an ISO standard on self-declared environmental claims, a type 2 label. So I mentioned the type 1 label, that's a very harsh one. This is a document you can implement yourself for specific topics. And it uses all the standards like registered symbols, general principles, carbon footprint production. So it uses all the standards to prove certain things. And here is a small list of all things that you could claim, where you can find aid in how can I support this claim. So I picked out one, extended product life. So this is a text from the standards. So what do you want to do when you have an extended product life? How can you claim this? So you want a prolonged use, improved durability, and via that you want to reduce the use or reduce the use of resources or reduce the waste. And they consider this a comparative claim. And then they point out that the requirements of 6.3, this is my next slide, you need to meet them. So it states then an extended life period, a percentage of improvement or a measured value. So that you need to state out. And there's an evaluation methodology that you need to follow. And it's in accordance with clause 6 and with the appropriate standards that you need to use. So you need to use standards that are applicable for what you are claiming. So the evaluation. So the previous part referred to this part, and that's the difficulty in reading standards, that they point out always to other parts. So you need to read over those documents a couple of times to fully understand it. But what is here, it is important that I need to use published standards or recognized test methods to measure my extended life. And you need to compare it with other products in the market. That's very important, that you need to compare it with something. So you need to measure it, and you need then to measure your product and the other product, and then you have a comparison. And then they say you need to apply quantified and calculated methods or figures using the same unit of measurement, which is a logic one, otherwise you're comparing pears and apples. The same functional unit, and then a little bit tricky for textiles, over a certain time interval. This is how you measure. Then, if you are measuring it and made the claim, you need to provide information. So your information, so when you make a claim, you can't say Arbeits-IP, how I did it. Or what our improvement is protected by IP. You can't make the claim if this is the case. And if somebody asks you the information, you need to disclose it at a reasonable cost if you need to work for it or need to prove something. But persons need access to the information that you are given. So if we then look to a textile product, as said, the time interval of 12 months or whatever is quite difficult, because how are you assuring that you have the same usage on two products? How if I'm wearing this costume and another person is wearing another costume, am I doing the same activities as that other person? Am I going to wear it out in the same way? So it's maybe much better to look at why is a certain product end of life, to determine why a product is end of life, and then what parameters are linked to that end of life. Then you choose an international standard linked to that parameter to be able to measure it. And then you are going to measure also an average product out into the market. So you are going to compare this. You will improve your product, and then you will measure your improved product. So am I reasonably better than the other one? And then you are going to communicate about your improvement. So if I have a product, a t-shirt, it's end of life, and I ask to my consumers, why do you throw it away? Why do you stop using it? It's a fictive example. Perhaps 40% says, there's a hole in it, I throw it away. 30% says, for me, it's discolored, I throw it away. And then 15% says, filling occurs, and for me, it's gone. And then you have some other reasons, but here you have the big amount. So you are linking that then to an international standard, an ISO standard, to measure that parameter so that you can objectively compare it, make a comparison. So that you can communicate also the level of improvement. We have that much better abrasion resistance, that much better color fastness, that much better resistance to pilling. So that you very specifically communicate. And nobody can give you a fine for that because you communicate very directly, very objectively. Important, you need a third-party verification in the future. Now you can do it yourself, but in the future, third-party verification. But from a testing lab, a report could be sufficient in this. There's no need in telling how you improve your product in this case. So just referring to the international standard is sufficient. When you communicate, use the correct terminology. There's a standard in development, environmental aspects vocabulary, that is on the Vienna Agreement. So this is an EN ISO in the making. So if the European Commission wants, it can harmonize the standard if it sees the need into this. But this, I gave some examples of definitions: multi-material textile product. This is still in development. Probably it will still change because there's a lot of debate on this. When can I call it a monomaterial? When can I call it a multi-material textiles? And actually, basically, we are making this because a lot of people are claiming it's a monomaterial textiles, and they leave out the stitching yarn and the label, and they declare it's 100% cotton. So for a recycler, this gives an issue. So you can't declare that it's 100%. But that's why we want these definitions. So look into this document, what definitions are there, so that you communicate into a common way. Third-party verification. There are a lot of labels on certain aspects. So if I want to state there's recycled content, you have the global recycle standard, you have QSR by BQA. You have certain labels that can help you in stating certain parameters. So in the future, this will be very important that you will use those third-party verifications. So I gave here a little bit an overview and put them where they are interacting. Like Oecotex is mainly on health and safety, unless you have the Annex 6, which also take the environments into account. So that's why it's there. So the more they are to the center, the more they take global sustainability into account. Recycled content. I spoke to the people of H&M this morning, but this was a claim from in 2017. They said, we have here a sustainable garment, and it's made of a recycled polyester from shore plastics. They never communicated within communication online how much recycled plastics was in there, but a person who heard the presentation got the impression that it was 100%. So I went and looked into it online, and when I Googled bionic, because that was mentioned in the communication, I ended up with a filling material for artificial grass grounds. So this was actually not it. When I googled then bionic yarn, I came out with this, which is actually a composed yarn. You have a core yarn to give strength, then you have fibers that are spun around the core yarn, and around that is another yarn to give the color properly and again strength. So how much recycled plastics is in there? And this is something I want to make you aware of. If you have a recycled yarn, often only part of the yarn is recycled content. If it's not certified, don't trust your supplier. So to be sure that you are certain that there's 20, 30 or 100% of recycled content, it really needs to be certified. We can't test it. There's no test method. Very important. So I get the question often, how can I declare my recycled content? Because legislation, the legislation that exists now is basically there on safety and on not cheating the consumer, but it doesn't take into account circular economy, sustainable economy. So there's no obligation to mention the recycled content, but a lot of people want to do this. And there's a certain piece within the legislation is that you can mention before or after a trade name. So if you think about recycled as a trade name, you can mention it before or after the actual generic name. So recycled-polyester or polyester-recycled. Like viscose made from bamboo. So it's not a bamboo fiber, it's viscose. And originates from bamboo, but the generic name is a viscose. So you can treat recycled in the same name. This can be found in the frequently asked questions of the legislation. Be clear on the recycled content. Like I said, it's not because you have a recycled yarn that it's 100% recycled content. So you might disclose polyester, recycle that percentage, and then polyester with a percentage. That is very clear what the recycled content is. In the USA, you have on specialty wool fibers, you need to declare if it's recycled. This is mohair, cashmere, camel, alpaca, llama, and vincuna. The regulation will be changed because the Commission realized that they need to take into account the circular economy, that people are making claims that are not justified, so they are going to change this legislation, and recycled content will be part of this regulation. What you developed already in the Netherlands is an NTA, Nederlands Technische Afspraak, on circular textiles. And basically this document helps you into declaring the recycled or reused content. So we went further than only recycled. We implemented also the remanufacturing, the repair, and the reuse. And we make a classification of it. So it has 3 dimensions of input material. And basically you have post and pre-consumer material. But the pre-consumer material is split up because we want to avoid that Zalando will recycle their materials and say, it's recycled content, when it comes back from a consumer when it's never used. Those products are still fit for use and they should be used. They should not be recycled. So therefore we split up this into categories. They are based on the 4R strategies because we wanted to implement it. And it's based on the state of the waste. Also open and closed loop, we integrate it so that it's very clear that it's polyester coming from a PET bottle. By the way, the European Commission also mentions in their policy they want fiber-to-fiber recycling, normal PET-to-fiber recycling in the future. Anyhow, forget the PET bottle. Coca-Cola and Co, they want their materials back to make new bottles. So you will not even be able to make in the future fibers out of PET bottles, because there will be a fight for materials. The Netherlands is also working on a certification scheme, so a third-party verification for these recycled content. Yeah, you can find the slides afterwards. You don't need to take pictures. Within the CEN Technical Committee 248, Textile and Textile Products, you have a working group on the circular economy. And there the NTA is brought as proposal for a new standard. So we want to bring this Dutch document onto European level. And what we decided already is we take out the terminology and implement it in the vocabulary document that I referred to earlier, that is on an EN ISO. And we will additionally work on other documents like minimum quality level, product passports, PEF, so product environmental footprint category rules, and then on design principles. And possibly there is a mandate coming from the European Commission. So what they did for plastics might happen also for textiles. So that they say you need to develop this and this and this document. Or it's actually more, please will you develop this? I mentioned already that is there for product. So on a minimum quality level, life prolongation, I gave 2 examples for clothing. You have already some documents out there that can be used. There's the ICLA document. I know that you can find it on the website of Crea Moda, as a federation of clothing producers in Belgium. And this has a lot of requirements for fabrics used for clothing. But there's also from ETSA, there's the European Federation on the textile maintenance companies, has a document, but also the EU Ecolabel and GOTS got requirements. So you can look into what are these different standards demanding and then draft a European document from this. Floor covering, they already have a standard which has 2 categories, one for domestic use, one for professional use, and then 3 levels with requirements on quality. So this is actually the quickest thing that you can do towards a circular economy is to improve your quality. This can be done already now. So probably those documents will come up very fast, and it could be that European Commission will put requirements on this so that they will say, okay, you have a minimum quality level by legislation. Circular economy, but everybody, if you talk to people, what do you understand as a circular product, as circular economy? You will get a lot of different answers. Therefore, ISO is developing standards to define what is a circular economy, what is a circular product. And they are, for us, what we see for the textile industry, 3 documents of importance. That is the framework and principle for implementation, because there are a lot of definitions in there. Measuring the circularity framework, and then especially the last one, a product circular data sheet. This will be a template that 2 parties can use on how to communicate about the circularity level of a certain product. And European Commission has interest in this document because they want a product passport. So what the intention is of this document, that you have a template that is then further developed by every industry in their own documents. So within the CEN working group, probably we will develop a document based on what ISO did here in the future to have a product passport. Microplastics free. It's also in European policy that they want to get rid of microplastics. So this claim is made also, but at the moment there's no standard. It is in development, but there's no standard out there that can give you comparison data. So there's standard development at the moment on fiber loss from fabric during washing, And then if I have a sample, how to evaluate. Because if I have a polyester cotton fabric, with the first standard, we will wash out also the cotton fibers. And this will be taken into your measurements. So you need the second standard to say, watch out, there's a lot of cotton inside it. So it's not all microplastics. So the European Commission is waiting on those standards for their policy. They were quite angry that we would take so long, because normally to develop a standard is in EN is 2.5 years, 3 years. And they were not happy because they want to make policy and legislation. There's a third standard there, but I don't really believe in that one because it's a big washing machine where you put garments inside. And how are you going to compare a vest with a piece of underwear? So also cross-contamination, plastics might stick behind in the machine, taken into account in the next wash. Yeah, the Japanese believe in this method, but a lot of Europeans don't believe in it. There's airborne, people are thinking about that, and what about abrasion? If I have a piece of working garment and I sit on my knees all days, I will have abrasion on my knees, forming microplastics. From a piece of textiles, when it's filament, fabric made of filaments, probably it releases very few microplastics, but then due to that, it can start to release. So how are we going to deal with that? So microplastics is a very complicated issue, but we are working on it. On organic and biodegradable, so I already told you if I mention organic, I need to be compliant with the regulation. But for me, it's not clear. If I put a lot of chemicals on my bio-cotton, can I still call it organic or not? If I put a coating on it, is it still organic? This is not taken into account within the regulation. And for me, that's a flaw. But at least they took it up. So wool and cotton, the production at least, is covered by this legislation. We can't test this except for genetically modified organisms and pesticides that we can check. But on the pesticides, if I dyed it, washed it, and so on, probably the pesticides are long gone or below detection limits. So also there, it's not very confident. So if you want to claim this, practically the only way is via GOT certified products. They take chemicals into account. So the chemical use is limited in this case. Then a very difficult one and a very badly understood topic is biodegradability, because you have forgotten aspects. You need 3 things. First of all, your material needs to fall apart, degrade. And then you need to compost, because otherwise you might end up with microplastics if it doesn't compost. And then after it compost, you need to be sure that there are no harmful chemicals in the environment left. So also the chemical content needs to be assessed with this. So, and those 3 aspects need to be well in accordance with one another. To give you an example, you have the rubbing sponge that everybody uses to do their dishes. The green fibers, when do you throw the sponge away? When they all went down the drain. So those fibers actually, if you would have this sustainable and biodegradable, you would need to have them decompose in an aquatic environment and also biodegrade and compost in that environment. So it has nothing to do with composting in your garden or industrial. So you need to think in these aspects. What happens with my product? And can I measure this? And this is also a lack that you don't have a lot of measurement methods for this. So there's also a working group working on that, biodegradability, but they work too limited regarding the aspects or the environments where you want something to degrade. This is for me a very good example in communication, Unilever. when they communicate about their sustainability of their products, they say, we started there, we want to go there, and we are now here. And this is the way how we measure it. So they're very clear, very correct in their communication. Please have a look on certain aspects what they are doing, because they are a good example. So if you want to participate in standardization, if you want to have an influence on standardization, also want to be acknowledged on what is coming and want to implement it up front, you can participate. So for the Netherlands, the contact person is Sarah Delat. If you want to be part of the Mirror Committee, you can contact her. And for Belgium, if there are Belgian companies, you contact me or my colleague Karen Euffinger. If there are people from other countries, I can look it up and give you the contact person for that country. So this was my presentation. I don't know, is there still time for...
I gave you a little bit more because it's so interesting, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but
Okay.
we're over time. But thank you so much. Warm applause for you.
Thank you.